So now we're standing in this corner of the gallery where we're covering quite a bit of the transition then to Rose Royale. And did you actually, sorry to ask you this while we're on tape, but it just happened to dawn on me. So did you actually ever see him when they were shooting any of these things? Or?
100%, that's how I met him.
Oh, okay, so you saw a lot of these.
I met Ed at the Rose Royale.
No,
it was actually
I meant in the costumes.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. Because I have no idea how many costumes there are. I mean, there's literally thousands of pictures in these files, and it's pretty amazing the elaborateness, and they're not just like trying on a dress or showing off a dress or something or an entire ensemble. They're actually performative. They're also there's sort of a, what's what I'm looking for? It's like acting out, because these are so different. Like there's this looks like a princess, or a queen. I mean not like a queen, like we think in the just hey girl sort of thing, but this is literally like with an ermine collar and and a crown and then this is a very elegant evening gown and a completely done up hair, and it's not like quite like Cindy Sherman where she's taking on the persona of some. Well, it is taking on a persona. I guess that's what he's doing. We just don't know who the persona is. A lot of times, you know who they are with some of the artists, but they're so dramatically different. I mean, this one definitely conjures up Rose.
Rose de la Vie, which I think is very deliberate. He knew Duchamp, and he said the name Rose Royale was derived from Duchamp's Rose de la Vie. I think he's creating these kind of, he has his own persona, Rose Royale, but then within that there are these different chapters and stories, and each one is incredibly...
Or maybe desires, to be one of these women or to be one of these characters, or because there are even different periods of time. I mean, it's not that they're all contemporary. These are kind of look like your
historical references.
Very historical. A lot of them, and some of them quite elegant and very contemporary, like these two right here. Dramatic, some very incredibly dramatic, and this is a photo somebody had taken of him. In yet another costume.
This is Andre Serrano portrait of him, and we also. So when we're looking at this, we started before looking at some formalist, drawings and sculptures, and then when you're going through his loft, he had this big huge loft on Houston, and you uncover thousands of photographs with all this work, and you say, wow. Looking at how he's operating, he says this is very deliberate. And also on top of that, there's film and video that goes to another layer of conversation. We know from looking at those films and videos and other things I knew, he was having people doing seamstressing, incredibly complicated. And then the other thing from this period, and also the wigs and the dresses, towards the end of his life, a lot of those were donated to the Harvey Milk School and to their foundation. But this particular drawing, to me, really stood out as a really important transitional piece, because during the 80s, he had kind of a figurative kind of period. But this one, we see it says painting on the bottom. Now, this reminds me a lot of Jasper Johns type of text and of Neil
And it's
Jenny.
also shadowed. It's in two different, it's same font, but two different scales. One is very shaded, and then the other one is darker.
To me, what really stands out in this work is it's, he's drawing in pastel and color, but it's drawing in sculpture. And here what I see, from my interpretation as a curator, is I'm seeing he's signaling makeup. He's talking about makeup. He's talking about the relationship as applying makeup as a type of painting. And I feel like there was a period where you wouldn't see that as part of a practice. There was artists, like Christian Marclay or something, who was making audio works that then you look at years later and you say, wow, this is avant-garde, this is art. I think now, like 100 years after Duchamp, easily we can start reconsidering the canon, re-looking at different types of artwork and saying, wow, I view this as artwork. And so this is a formalist work of art. It says painting on the piece of art, but I think from what I'm seeing in the piece with the makeup brushes and the implication of the face and holding the kind of heart-shaped, it looks like a makeup kind of box, is that it's the application of the makeup that is the painting, and then I would carry that across into all of these personas and this whole activity that we've kind of categorized as social practice, represented here by only 10 works, but they're representative of thousands of photographs and videos and films.
Oh yeah, tremendous number. The other thing too that's important here, I think that where he is making it clear that what he's focusing on is the makeup, is the fact that is almost like photorealist, that part. The rest of it, not so much. It's not done with the same degree of precision as the face. So the painting, he almost didn't need to say it, but he's making it clear that it's the face. It's painting. It's a creation. It's transformative, and you see that in his actual makeup. I have to ask Isaac a lot of times, is this him? Because it's really hard to tell. Because the face, like in this one of the Queen, is totally different. I mean, it almost looks porcelain. It looks like a porcelain doll face. Maybe that is it. Maybe it was one of those sort of dolls that girls got where they were porcelain and they were different costumes. But they're quite extravagant. The other thing too is he was good friends with Hannah Wilke, you said. Yeah. Did Hannah ever, I know she photographed him, and there's different things. In fact, the one, we should have pointed it out, in the case of Ed with the sculptures, the metal sculptures that were a little bit more pristine, you said that was a picture taken by Hannah Wilke, correct? Yeah. Did she ever photograph him in any of his costumes? Do you know?
I don't know. She could have, but that piece, I know that she photographed that one. I think he photographed her also on her deathbed. We had talked about some of this, in relation to different, like the relation to feminism. He also has writings that we haven't really gotten into where he's talking about this very literally and directly. He's talking about his relationship to feminism, his relationship to formalism and art as a gay man. And someone like Cindy Sherman or Martha Wilson, you could talk about a relationship between them formally or even theoretically, like what they represent, what this work represents. But I do think, you're mentioning Hannah Wilke is incredibly important because how she was using herself as the subject. And, he, in the period where they were very close, and then before she passed away, I don't think he was doing that as much, but I think definitely that was a big influence. I mean, they were very, very close friends.
Well, this series, and we're going to organize them as best as we can from what his intention was. There are large-scale negatives and what have you, but we will start constructing these and assembling them because he clearly was documenting his transition. And just like, which we'll get to next is the films and videos. And again, as we mentioned before, he was all about documenting and but also I think remembering his friends and sort of his feelings and things like that. So I think the AIDS piece and the videos and the films that he's done with the trans community, I think are more about the collegiality, the community, his friends, his close personal friends who meant a lot to him. There's also, he was very active in the club scene. We have a lot of images of those as well. Which are quite fascinating. And they're playful. I mean, they're typical sort of very campus Christmas, sort of, very theatrical, very funny. A lot of them you really get a good giggle out of them. But there's also a lot of activism where he was meeting with the press, or they were on marches, or they were, meeting with politicians. And so there was a lot of this activism and sort of revving people up, and always in costume, and always in full regalia, and they're quite fascinating to look at.
And
You were
then
gonna say
and I was
something?
going to say, maybe in front of the videos too, but the other thing is that it's not always the flamboyantness. From other people, when I interview people to try to work on the obituary, one of the things that struck me is a soft, personal activism that also was pervasive in his work. And you see it in the videos because they become very intimate, personal, one-on-one. And he was the type of person that you felt comfortable with him, it was easy to talk to him, and especially about very complex and difficult issues. And that's one of the things I think is also very fascinating about his work beyond just formalist traditional sculpture, is the complexity of life that he brought to his work.
And I think the other thing too is, posthumously, you didn't have the privilege of, not that he would have probably minded, but you just never got around to it. Looking at a lot of just his personal effects. I mean, it's like we said before, a lot of stuff was packed away. He wouldn't have drug it out just to, have a chat and a coffee with you about it. But now, having to go through it and help his sister kind of organize everything, the writings were really amazing. And that's how we realized and sort of thought about this curation of sort of, it's a queer lens, looking at the art world and these decades of sort of things happening both formally and culturally, but looking at it through a queer lens as opposed to the lens we normally get it delivered to us, which is from a heterosexual lens. And so I think that's what's really interesting. But moreover, later through the 2000s, it really became through the lens of a transgender person. And he was very passionate about that community here in New York, and so hence this latter part of his practice. So that's why the show is titled as it is you can see how he operated in this world, minimalism and post-minimalism, and but yet sort of how he was subverting it. He was sort of creating his own sort of language and coding, and having this sort of discourse, that was sort of an undercurrent and separate from what was sort of the mainstream. And I think that's what's sort of interesting about him, and that's why we've really got to take more time digging into the writings, because the writings are very personal, and he wrote a lot. Yeah. He jotted a lot of things down, often wrote them as letters, and sometimes we're wondering, did he send this letter? And so we don't know, and it's hard to say because he didn't keep them organized in that way. But there's I think a lot more to unpack about Ed that I think would be fascinating in terms of an artist who, through this very turbulent period, both formally, in terms of art history, but also culturally.
Well, you really relate to him on a personal level when you look at some of the notes. That's like, I'm so depressed, I couldn't sew the button back on my coat, and it's cold. And then other ones where he's writing very, very formally, like Donald Judd or something, about what he's trying to do with his sculpture. But through the range of that, you see the humanity and the reflection, and also all these issues that we've been discussing today.
Also it's just that binary, and maybe we're overplaying it with him because he's no different probably than the rest of us. We all have sort of a dull moment or a depressed moment, and then we can also be very professional when we need to key it up. And but I think but the difference between most of us and him is it translated into his work. And he became his work. I think that's the other thing. Very rarely does an artist, even if they're gay or have interested in the transgender world, not everyone does be able to live that out the way he wanted to and did. And so he's a very amazing story, I think. And but the art is incredible, and the more I'm just around it, the more enthralled I get with it, because everything was just so cleverly done. And you just really appreciate his brilliance and this sort of spitfireness about him, that you just don't see every day. I mean, it wasn't just a job to him, it was him. It is what he did. It's who he was. It defined him. And so I think that's what's always funny. Sort of an artist, I think, in that regard, don't you?
100%, definitely.